Hello everyone. Today's drawing is going to be of Nova Sam Alexander from Marvel Comics. To start with, I masked off all the areas I didn't want because I'm going to be working with watercolors and working on the background. So I wanted to be sure that none of the colors got onto my figure in the foreground. So I masked off all the edges. After that, I thoroughly wet down my paper after I had prepared my colors and began to dot all the colors all around. This became the base of my galaxy, which I put into the background. I guess it's more of a nebula, but it will be pretty in the end, no matter what. So I used several different colors. I used 3 colors of blue, a purple, and a red. And I chose purple because it's the mid-tone between blues and reds, and they will kind of mix with themselves, but that provides a lot more of a vibrant purple to work with. To create this effect, I'm going to be dabbing the paint onto my drawing. You also want to be sure that when you have the paper wet down, that it's fairly wet, maybe not sopping, but rather wet, so that the colors will blend nicely. And you kind of help them blend using the tip of your brush. As you can see, I use a rather large brush for this process. As you're working, if any of your paper dries out, if you're not working fast enough, just add a little bit more water. I clean off my brush a little bit with a paper towel, and then I add a little bit more water onto it, and then kind of put it back on the page because you want, like I said, a nice wet piece of paper for this. Also, if you find that it's not blending properly, try using a larger brush. The larger brush will hold more color and will disperse it a lot better. As you can see, watercolors dry a lot lighter than the way they look when you put them on. So in order to darken them, you're going to have to go through and add some more layers. I went through and added several more layers using a wet on dry technique. And wet on dry, what that is you have a wet brush and a dry background. And then I went through and worked the page. Every so often I would kind of go back in and do a bit of a wet on wet so that it would kind of bleed out in a nice way. But I wanted to kind of control a little bit more where the color went. So I used a wet on dry technique. And you go through and you stipple just as before. An important note is also not to go through and paint over everything. I liked the really light blues that I had. I think it gives it a really nice kind of airy effect. So I made sure that I left a little bit of that color showing to give it that light in the background. Also, I kind of reinforced some of the swirls. So if you look at pictures of actual nebula, they kind of are have these gaseous clouds, and I really wanted to capture that through a swirling technique. Continue layering your colors on top. Work until you have achieved your desired effect, but be careful not to overwork your paper. So now you can see this tray that I'm holding up is actually an old jam jar lid. Is where I put my masking fluid when I'm working with it. It has completely dried, and I use this to remove my masking fluid. So it's really easy. You just pull it up off of your lid, and then you kind of roll it into a bit of a ball, and then you're going to work it with stippling motions, almost a stippling and rubbing motion, and pick up all of that masking fluid that you've laid down to protect your painting. Now we're going to create stars for a nebula. I did this using acrylic paint and a stiff brush. So you're going to go through and you're going to, as you can see the motion, you're going to flick it onto your page. And I took down my camera for this because it's very, very messy, so just cover anything you don't want to have white on it. This includes your workstation. Now we've finally come to what I've been waiting for the entire painting, and that is working on Nova's suit. So it was actually very difficult to do this because I was using watercolor paper and markers. So watercolor paper is very absorbent, Smooth bristle typically isn't that absorbent, which is what I typically use my markers on. So keep that in mind as you're blending. You're going to have to be really fast with your blending motions if you want to make a nice smooth blend, and even then it won't be perfect. But don't worry, it will create more highlights for you to use later on. One of the difficult things with this painting was to realize where the shadows are. The shadows in this drawing were really difficult because there's so much light from the Nova Force that it became difficult to see where shadows would lie. So just remember that he's holding a light in front of his face, and then he has one down next to his head, and then one right beneath him through his feet. So just remember that, and don't forget that his eyes are also emitting a light source. To create highlights on his suit, I used one of my lighter grays, and that created a shiny spot. You can see me playing with the shiny spots because I kind of made it a little too shiny, and I had to kind of get rid of some of them. But some will allow you to go through and create a nice shine to his suit. Also, an important note is to work from your lighter to your darker. This means that if you make a mistake, for instance, you lay down a light color that you decide you don't like, you can go back over it with the darker color and erase the mistake. As you can see on his arms and eventually on his legs, I created 2 highlight spots. This allows his leg to look a little bit more three-dimensional. Now to wrap up this picture, I am going through and drawing in the Nova Force. So to do this, I used some of my blue colors. I used actually 3 of my blue colors. I used my lightest, my mid-tone, and the darkest. I outlined all of the areas around the edges with actually my mid-tone. I did this to kind of really enforce the glowing effect, and then you blend in just around the edges your darkest color. This will give it a nice effect. However, if you've painted blue too close to the Nova Force, a dark blue, it might be better just to leave it a little bit more in the light blue section. This will kind of give you contrast and exemplify the glowing. Keep blending until you're happy with it. And then I went through and added some dots because in Ultimate Spider-Man, Nova has kind of dots within his Nova Force. And here's the finished product. Thank you guys so much for watching. Please give this video a thumbs up if you like it, and don't forget to subscribe to my channel.